Well, welcome back to the Social World Podcast. My name's Dave Niven, and as always, it's a pleasure to have your company. Now, over the years, we've been focusing a lot on safeguarding, focusing a lot on protecting the vulnerable, and trying to highlight some of the work that some of the incredible people around the world are actually doing, what they're achieving, what their problems are, what their challenges are, and to just let you have some insight into the what is, after all, a vastly challenging world. Today, I've got the chief executive of Raven, John Pizzuro, from the States. And John, it's a pleasure to have you. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, David. How you doing today? Hopefully pretty good.
I hope so. I hope so. So, look, I mean, I think I'd like to start a little bit, although we've done sort of a recording with you in the past, it's been a little bit of time. So, could you just begin to explain a little bit about what Raven is? We are the chief executive of Raven, and what your background is, and how it led up maybe to what you're doing now. Would that be all right?
Yeah, that's great. So Raven is a what they call a lobbying nonprofit. Basically, we're a group of retired folks, although I have to have my head examined because this is my retirement gig, um, going to Capitol Hill. So one of the things that we found while we were working is until there's more funding and there's more legislation and more regulation, things will not change. And every single time we ran into a problem, that was the solution. So we spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill. Ravens testified 5 times between the House and the Senate, as an example. So not only do we educate lawmakers, we write bill text, we're writing solutions, and then we're hopefully getting these solutions passed into law because I think uh, long term, that's the only thing that's going to drive children being safe.
Yeah. Okay. So lobbying for creating policy, kind of persuading people, using all the experience of you and colleagues to try and, if you like, move that oil tanker around. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, it's a fair assumption, except an oil tanker very rarely moves on a dime. So, unfortunately, I think it is a an oil tanker, or a big cruise ship, so to speak. But I,
Okay.
but I think that that's accurate. I mean,
Hmm.
the challenge is how do we do it, right?
Hmm.
Like even there's a lot of the companies that are exploiting, or they're not doing it personally, but their platforms are being used, are
Yeah.
housed in the States. So what we do here has implications around the globe. Um, and the more we can force companies to safeguard children better, as well as get resources for those who investigate and protect victims, the more likely we are to protect them.
So I mean, big tech, let's be honest, big tech are the real kind of problems in many cases here in terms of either their ability to understand or their ability to change or their ability to put sometimes safety before money. Is that fair?
Yeah, so money is the driving component. They have shareholders,
Mm.
right? So when you look at Meta, for example, if their stock went down and they weren't making as much profit, then your shareholders aren't. Now, the thing is that there's a lot like with Section 230 in the United States, which is if you're knowing that something happens, you don't take action, you're liable. But the companies get away with it because they don't know it's happening, even though they do. For example, is that if you and I are talking on WhatsApp and it's encrypted and no one knows, no one else sees it, then they really don't have to notify anyone. Now,
Mm.
their trust and safety teams, they care, but overall, the businesses don't. So, just to give you an example,
Mm.
is that if they have a tip or they have some information, the information that they provide to the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children is voluntary. They just have to make a complaint. On X and X day, let's say today, April 15th, I think I saw something. So just to let you know, there might have been something on the system.
Yeah.
So they voluntarily report to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So there's no uniformity in what they give or the data they give. And you have so many different providers That's part of the challenge too. And then the safety mechanisms. So let's say I am 10 or 11 or 12. I can easily download Snap and say that I'm 13 to be on 13, right? So there is no moderation.
Yes, yes, yes. In this country, in the UK, we've got some legislation coming up that includes compulsory reporting for professionals, whether it's teachers or social workers or caregivers or whatever, if they either suspect or they're in possession of anything harder evidence about child exploitation. Is that the sort of thing you were talking about? And if so, is it still far away from happening in America?
Well, yeah, I think it is. So, in part, if I saw something, then I can, and you can prove that I saw something,
Hmm.
then I'm going to be liable. And that's the other thing. It's the proof aspect of things, right? So, from a tech company, all they know is an IP address. Just to give you an example, from like, let's take a look at sextortion. So, like the Ivory Coast is targeting a lot of people, including in the UK as well as victims in the States.
Mm-hmm.
But what they're doing is, okay, Meta knows that these IP addresses are coming from the Ivory Coast. So let's say I report something, they get rid of one IP address, they get rid of one username, but there's another 20 associated IP addresses that
Yeah.
are still on there.
Yeah.
So they have the information. It's whether they act or not. And, look, I do believe in privacy. I do believe uh, in that regard. But at the same time, there's got to be a safety mechanism. And right now, the pendulum has swung more to profits than safety.
Mm.
And I think there has to be a balance.
What's your feeling about the kind of, if you like, the atmosphere at the moment among the legislative classes, if you like, or those that actually would be responsible for it? Because it seems to me that what you've just described about free speech uh, versus safety, I mean, it's a very balanced kind of argument in one way, isn't it? And therefore, trying to achieve what you're doing, it adds a little bit more complexity to it.
Yeah, well, you know what you have, David, is you have people that special interest groups, they have talking points that in a narrative that's false in order to get the things that they want. In the Senate, we've testified 5 times. I think I testified, Jesus, three
I
times.
watched you on YouTube, and for anybody listening, it's probably still available on YouTube, and I think it's a
Yep.
very good watch to listen to you. So just to give you a shout out.
Yeah, thanks. I testified 3 times in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Really good body. They really care and they're annoyed and they want things done. But in the States, in order to get a bill passed, you have to have it past the Senate and then you have to have it past the House of Representatives. The House is a little bit more challenging in getting anything passed. So the key to stopping legislation is just to get enough couple lawmakers just to block it. Now, if it ever got to the floor, meaning is that if it ever got to a vote, people aren't going to vote no. But the challenge is getting that legislation to the floor. And again, the balance between privacy,
Yeah.
um, I get it. Like someone shouldn't know your medical records, but if a child is being exploited, you're telling me that the technology doesn't exist, that you can't examine that, you can't have a third-party program search for child sexual abuse material of children being exploited. I think you can, but that's where I think privacy stops.
Okay. Let's dig a little bit deeper, if I might, because I know that from some of the work you've done earlier, we talked about, if you like, one of the most contemporary challenges to children's safety, maybe at the moment, is AI. And it's the generated images of child sexual abuse. I think I remember you telling me that you thought it was spiking, as it were, at the moment. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's more than fair. It's completely completely accurate. Here's the funny part is that I did an AI presentation in the House of Representatives a year and a half ago,
Hmm.
and telling you where we're going, and we're actually here. So now I can create an image of you or me, David, and I can make us a child. I can make us naked. I can nudify us. I could make us do other things. So the point is that While I never took those images, I could do that. Sextortion cases, before you would need a child to give you or send you an image. I don't need for that child to send me an image. All I need is their face, a public facing picture, and I can create a whole sexual series based upon that child and then use that like they sent it to me. So when you talk about AI and you talk about chatbots, as an example, if I went on ChatGPT and I asked them, how do I groom a child? It says I can't answer that. However, if I said I'm doing a research paper on how children get groomed, it'll give me.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just so easy to get around these things sometimes, isn't it? I mean, I remember it, what, 15 years ago? I don't know, but a long time ago, when we were giving people advice, parents giving parents advice about their work, their stuff for their pictures, for example, on Facebook, and the numbers that wouldn't keep them private. It was just incredible, and I bet you it's still a huge number of all the platforms where people post their very personal and kind of favorite pictures of their children. So many of them are accessible to what you've just described.
Yeah, and look, everyone has some public facing picture. It's very hard for you not
Hmm.
to public at some point or find an image or image and then create it. And everyone's seen the memes of for example, of like I think there was a Trump and Zelensky one going around where they were doing things. There's obviously deep
Yeah.
fake and then there's obviously completely generated AI. And I think that is where technology is, and they're open source, meaning is that I could do it just on an app, and it's getting worse and worse. So the ability to determine what's real and what's not is here as
Oh,
well.
Do you think that, well, let's take law enforcement to start with. And I know you've got a background in law enforcement yourself. I think you were, what, 25 years in law
Yeah,
enforcement, if
25
I
years.
remember your bio. But I mean, in terms of being able to keep up, in terms of being able to enforce or to protect or to put blocks up or walls up or protection of any kind, it's so much more difficult the more developed that AI and other kind of online kind of functions become. So what's your take on the ability to actually keep up to speed?
Well, we can't, and I think we're already. I mean, we were behind before AI, never mind now with the advent of AI.
Hmm.
So, look, I think we need some sort of regulation and guardrails. I think we need the ability to kind of police other organizations. I think I asked you this prior, but do you need a drug? Do you need some approval before drugs get passed
Yeah.
around in the UK,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Well, in the US, same thing, except we're giving everyone these computer programs
Hmm.
without anyone or any regulation checking on it, right? Like even if we went to seatbelts in the States, people were fighting against seatbelts. Well, now
Oh,
seatbelts are in every in every car, right? So it usually takes a whole bunch of tragedies before something happens, and we've already had our fill of tragedies
yeah.
in the child exploitation
I
world.
can take it. I mean, you're so right. I mean, the seat belts alone, people felt their civil liberties were being impinged. When we had baby seats to be put in for children, a lot of
Yeah.
people felt that they were being impinging their civil liberties. When we introduced speed limits for the cars, the exact same thing. I take your point. It's a complex situation that so many people resist sometimes anything that they think is interfering with their right to privacy.
It's not even that, but from the human nature, David, we don't like change. People don't
Mm.
like change.
Yeah.
So, you're dealing with the human component of what we believe too. And, sometimes how we're brought up and, what we think about. So all that plays into the challenge of trying to get laws passed.
Okay. Well, let me just sit on that point with you for a minute and go back to the very young John Pizzuro, who had just joined the police force. And from then on, you changed. because
Yeah.
you became aware of all sorts of things that molded the man and the kind of the road, the journey that you're now on. What feelings did you have as you progressed through law enforcement and then into kind of consultancy and governmental relations, strategic stuff that you do now? I mean, there must have been quite a lot of awareness, but a lot of challenging times as well.
Yeah, so when I started my career, I started, as a road trooper where, you're on the road. And then I went into organized crime. So, it's funny, The Sopranos, I'm from New Jersey, but, the TV show. But that I did a lot of organized crime cases. I started from wiretapping cars to stealing wiretapping people, stealing cars, putting car bugs in them, and even at one point, we wiretapped a Chinese national, via the internet. Um, all of that has taken, basically for me, I learned a lot about people, right?
Hmm.
So investigatively, I've always was fascinated about culture and where people come from and how people think. So I think that's the biggest thing that I took away from really my career. But I spent time in corruption, organized crime, all this before I started. The last leg of my career was internet crimes against children. So I think it gave me a baseline of other circumstances and experiences, which lends itself to me when I talk to lawmakers today.
Yeah, certain. Well, it's certainly given you the an accelerant, if you like, in terms of what you want to focus on now. But organized crime is heavily involved still, isn't it? In whether it's trafficking or whether it's slavery or whether it's just general kind of exploitation of children and young people. Organized crime have see lots of money to be made in this, don't they?
Well, here's the thing is generally speaking, child exploitation wasn't the conspiracy case like the cartels do. Now, having investigated non-traditional organized crime like Russian and Asian organized crime, there was a lot of trafficked uh, women at the time, women and men. Um, and then you have like the cartels. There's money making opportunities there. There's also money making opportunities now from the sextortion cases because the child exploitation used to be for sexual gratification. Now there's the belief that they people can financially benefit from it, and I think that's been the biggest shift.
Yeah, yeah. I do remember in this country, I think it must be about 8, 9, 10 years ago, the then leader of the chief of police, chief constables in England, actually went on record as saying that he thought there was at least 100,000 men sitting upstairs or wherever in their houses downloading child pornography, and it was just too overwhelming for police forces to actually cope with. And his view, which I hugely took umbrage with and had a big arguments with him on the radio and so on, was that matter should be handed over to the health service because it was an issue of psychology rather than criminality, which I think is absolutely wrong. But that's the what happens when you get overwhelming. It was like a tsunami of cases that were hitting all the police forces. And I don't know if there were events like that along the way for you where people began to think we just can't cope.
Well, I don't think the cope is just it's just a deluge. I think of it's a flood of information. So right now in the US, there's 225,000 IP addresses showing known videos and images of children being exploited. And you're talking infant and toddlers, right? We're only investigating 200 out of that 225,000 because we don't have the resources to do it. I think that, and that's in addition to getting all your cyber tips and all the other information that you get. So there's so much volume and we get to so little of it. I think that's where people become overwhelmed. It's just that they can't. There's no resources. How do you feel like, people I think that do this feel like they're like on Tom Hanks on Castaway, where they're stuck on the island, and pretty soon you're stuck on the island by yourself. You start talking to your volleyball.
Yeah, 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 right. And sometimes too, if you want to talk about islands and seas, you feel like King Canute trying to hold back the tide. It's almost an impossible task, but yet we do persist. And I think people like yourself and lots of others that I've talked about all over the world are trying their very best. But I think it all comes down to what you said as well. At the end of the day, regulation, legislation, tightening up what people can and can't do, and trying to get over that hurdle of invading privacy.
Yeah. And honestly, I think from a government standpoint, no one wants to. Listen, I don't care what David, what movies you like, or if you had a medical procedure. Like most people don't want that information. I guess TMZ
Mm,
would,
mm,
in the States, like gossip. But I think that law enforcement just wants the ability to protect kids, and there's nothing privacy generated about that. We're not looking for bank records or other things that they're talking about, but we're just trying to protect the children as best as possible. So I think that's part of it. And again, I think, like from an Apple standpoint, is think about this, is that there was 36 million cyber tips worldwide in 2023. Um, 250 of those 36 million came from Apple. Apple has a 59% market share in the US. So how much exploitation is happening on Apple servers,
How much
right?
percentage was Apple?
59% has a 59% market share in the US, yet they account for less than one hundredth of a percent of the actual cases reported.
Wow. That's such an imbalance, isn't it? And how close are people to actually getting that to
Oh,
change?
that's not happening. Maybe
No.
maybe in a decade.
Well, it's the
Um,
money. It's the money. We're back to the money again and the shareholders and everything. I mean, I remember a conversation with you before where I was saying, look, yes, it's like oil, it's like coal, it's like climate change, it's like all the things that people are got huge financial investments in and they just will not change. And there's so many vested interests. But you were saying to me that the tech giants out compete them all in terms of the actual kind of uh, um, money involved and the actual kind of influence that they've got. Is that still the case?
yeah, yeah, and I think that's the problem, right? So um trying to fix those things. And again, people are going to make the argument for whatever they need in order not to change things. I gave you the seatbelt example, and there's no funding, to protect children. I think it's just something that people just don't want to talk about and they don't want to acknowledge.
Mm. What's your experience, John, of recent governmental changes? Because we all know that governments change every few years, and everybody tries to do their own thing. But currently, do you see any light at the end of the tunnel, or do you see more darkness?
Um, so probably it's tough, David. I don't know. It's like it's the darkness aspect of things, I think.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, I know it's very depressing sometimes, isn't it? Especially for people like yourself who kind of know just a little bit more than most people about what's actually happening to children. Um, I don't know. But look, imagine you were talking to that because this is the thing. You mentioned the individual all the way through it and how people do or don't respond to things or civil liberty or privacy and all that. But if you were talking to the average guy or the average woman anywhere, because the world is such a small place, so it could be the UK, it could be America, wherever, how could they be influenced to try and help the cause?
I think that if everyone takes it upon themselves, for example, if they talk to their lawmakers, I think if they share their stories, if they share their stories in media, and honestly, from a political perspective, they vote those people that support it. So I think that's part of it. I think that's where people can take, action. I mean, look, we vote people in here in the States,
Hmm.
and you know what? We can vote people out too. I think that, you know, I think this is everyone's issue. I think this is everyone's challenge is keeping our kids safe. And I think that sometimes we believe it's not going to happen to our children, it's going to happen to someone else's. But the reality is it will do that.
Yeah, it's a really kind of complex Gordian knot if you want to bring kind of mythology into it. I mean, it's just sometimes so impossible to untangle. But okay, but look, I want to ask you about the landscape, if you like. And I'd like to also finish. I chair a couple of boards, and in America. Does the various faith settings, the church settings, I mean, here we've had recent sort of scandals about, the Church of England, some people not reporting things, some people kind of sitting on things, other people getting sacked and big inquiries now and so on. Did the church ever figure in terms, oh, there's so many different churches I know, but in the American landscape of exploitation?
So like the church, it's people that we trust, right? So we tend to worry about that. But look, I don't care where, if it's the church, I don't if it's your school or counselors. Look, we've had people that have exploited children in every type of profession, from law enforcement or what have you. The challenge becomes is making sure that there's programs within that actually teach that. We also don't teach children exactly the mechanisms and the manners of how offenders actually will reach out to you. We teach don't go to this app, beware strangers, but we don't delve into deeper, subject matter so people understand. And I think that prevention piece is really important.
Yeah.
And the churches and the organizations have to take ownership that, you know what, it happens in their organizations.
Yeah, they've got to admit it. I mean, there's just no way these days that something can be covered up for a long time. There's going to be some break. Can I just ask you a question, John? Because
Sure.
it's something, I mean, over the years, people who abuse children, in my view, I was always asked about this. Why do they do it? Or what happens? And how can you stop them doing it again? And all this kind of thing. And my answer was always something generally along the lines of, well, forget those in organized crime that just do it for the money or whatever. But I mean, those that actually do it because they're sexually interested in children, they're like the nearest I can think of, they're like addicts. And as with any addiction, you're never going to get cured. All you're going to have is control. That's the best thing, is control rather than cure, because there's always going to be an attraction. Because over the years, we've tried chemical castration, we've tried we've got incarceration, we've tried shaming, we've tried community notifications, and all of them have had their flaws, and all of them have been got round and so on. But generally speaking, it's never going to not be something that's in an abuser's life. They're always going to be interested. It's a question of how can we, society, control them. Is that something that you would buy into?
Well, I think here's the thing is if I'm an offender and I'm into 12-year-olds,
Hmm.
I'm always going to be into 12-year-olds. You know what I mean? It's not going to change. So that curbing isn't going to go away because that's what I fantasize about. So we need basically um, a framework where we can protect children. I mean, I think it's incarceration. I think it's notifications. I think they're always going to reoffend. Um, so I think that's how I look at it. I don't think you're going to be able to completely stop it. I mean, that's part of the problem.
The reoffending rate is quite high. I can't give you a percentage right now as far as the UK is concerned. It's not in front of me, but I suspect it's pretty high in most of the Western industrialized countries.
Yeah, it is, and um, I think that again, I don't have that stat or that percentage, and I think the New York Times posted like 3 to 5% of the population could be pedophiles, and it's assuming more males than females. But you're not going to stop that. And as long as they have access to remain quiet and hidden, they can lurk from the shadows.
Yeah.
And identifying those people, I think, is important. I think, secondly, is that, incarceration, there's no rehabilitation. It's like if I committed an act and, I sexually abused a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old, when I get out, I might not do it again because I'm worried about going back, but my interest is still going to be a 10-year-old.
Well, look, I'm very well aware, and I think it's because you told me of the discrepancies between different states, for example, even in America. Uh, I think it was Arizona,
Yeah.
California you used as your examples. Do you want to just say a little bit about that for people listening?
Yeah. So for example, like in New Jersey or in Arizona, if I get charged with one image, it's 40 years I get.
Mm.
If I get one image in California, I get probation. So I don't even get charged. So the sentencing is disparate in the states. There's federal guidelines basically, but most of the charges are done state to state. So that's what makes it different.
Why? I mean, okay. I mean, I understand differences. I understand whether it's the color of the state or the background of the state or the wherever, but it's that's such a huge discrepancy. And I do understand that, federal law can't supersede state law unless sort of boundaries are crossed, between states and so on. But I mean, is there any movement towards kind of rationalizing all of that?
Um, it's hard because each state is different.
Hmm.
You have people that don't want, like, there's like the Democratic Party in the States, they don't want to have more criminalization. So and that's just generic, and it's not the whole party, it's just a few people that want that. And what happens is I think that we blanketly say yes and no to something without looking specifically for carve outs. And I think that's part of what gets lost in the wash.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's just such a huge chasm between the two states that you mentioned, you know? I guess in many cases then that if you want to abuse children, go to California.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, unless you get charged federally, and then it's
Yeah.
going to be the same, everywhere, right? So,
Mm. Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
and I think that's part of the challenge.
Okay. Well, look, we're getting towards maybe the last few minutes, but I don't want to waste this at all. I mean, a little bit of the education side of it. All right, we've kind of touched on that all the way through how important it is to educate both individuals, communities, and lawmakers. Um, how do you think that's developing? Do you think there is a head of steam, as it were, now? I mean, because you put a good case to Senate and a good case to Congress. I mean, and I know that you've explained how difficult it is to get bills through, but you're there. Raven's there. You've taken on a couple more people recently, I believe, haven't you?
Yep. So we hired a couple people. One to do, again, focus more legislatively. We're involved in the states as well. For us, I think the more we can fund Raven, the more people I can hire, and the more we could actually pass some laws.
Hmm.
So because there's a lot of work, David, that goes into passing a bill. It's not just we write it and then hope for it to pass, but we have to go talk to different parties. We have to go talk to different committees. Then we have to go get co-sponsors. Then we have to get it out of committee. Best case scenario, if everything went well for you, a bill's passed in 14 to 16 months. Most bills are passed, 2 years, or actually subsequent Congresses. We've
Yeah.
had bills that protect kids that were taken up 4 years ago that are getting passed today.
Yeah.
So that's part of the challenge.
It's a very slow process. We're back to that oil tanker again, or whatever.
Yeah.
But whatever. I mean, can you envisage? I mean, yeah, all of what you've talked about comes from a huge amount of experience that you've had in in the United States. But I also know that you have an eye on the world, as it were, because it's such a small world now in terms of communication and in terms of legislation and in terms of actual the internet and all that. Do you have a great deal of time to form contacts internationally, or do you
Um,
really?
I I
Yeah,
do have contacts internationally from my work in the task force in this field.
yeah.
So everything like from Interpol to Australia and some of the other there's a lot of other task forces around the globe that are doing really awesome and great work. So again, we are a community. I think we're a global community because there's a lot of times where I could tell you this. I've had victims in the States and in the UK. I've had suspects. I had one person from the UK fly to the States to buy a 9-year-old child. So
Mm,
having that network is really important because again, it's global. Today we just jump on a plane and go get a victim, like that's if an offender is. So, and with the internet, we're just global.
yeah. I mean, a lot of your focus and a lot of your written material on your website. But by the way, for anybody listening, I'm going to make sure that will you give me anything you want in terms of Raven and in terms of
Yep.
events and everything. We're going to put that all on the front page of the podcast. So links, contacts, you can read up about John's work in much more detail, and that'll be on there. I love a lot of it is child sexual abuse, if I might say, though, isn't it? I mean, I've done quite a bit of work with people who've been doing things like the supply chain problems, where children are being abused internationally, whether it's the clothes we wear
Yeah.
or whether it's the food that we eat or whatever. And some terrible, shocking stories about the literally millions of children around the world that are being exploited. Is that just a step too far, or do you come across that in your work as
No,
well?
it just in every step of the way. Look, society, right, David? It's just there are people that are going to prey on vulnerable people, and
Mm,
children have to be vulnerable because of their age. And again, that's what's going to happen. It's just the elderly get, when they become vulnerable too, and that's what people look, not to go into the psychology of things. But again, where people can impose their power and thought over a weaker person, all you have to do is look at history. It's been done our entire
mm,
career since the world has began.
yeah. Right. 1 minute, John, to give a message to parents, communities, lawmakers, anywhere you want. Just the kind of the message that you've got. I mean, because I know you've had successes. Let's not play that down in your work. But we also know that there's a vast amount there in that landscape out there that's still to be done. But what kind of message would you like to give people who are listening to this?
Easy, changes you. It all starts with you. Everything that we do in life starts with you. Look, if we pay attention to the things that are wrong, we have the ability to fix them. But first, we have to pay attention to them. And the other message I have for especially parents, it can happen to you. It's not just your neighbor, it's not your child's friend. It is your child as well. I think if we could take an onus and we can define that and change that ourselves, every one of us has the power to change, but it starts with us.
Okay, so be vigilant and don't get blinded by false privacy.
Yes.
Okay, John. Well, look, John Pizzuro, I hope we can talk again soon. But I really appreciate you coming on the program from Raven. I encourage people to look up the work you're doing, and thank you very much indeed from all those that you've actually helped so far.
Yep. I appreciate it, David.